There is a special plane in nuclear option. Special because it's often disregarded and in fact discarded by pilots from both sides of the war. But this plane is quite deadly, extremely formidable in the right hands of course, which probably rules me out, but still quite deadly in the ground attack role, but also very formidable in air-to-air combat too. You can picture the plane when seen by its enemy is often sneered at. Even its name, the Cricket, doesn't sound very threatening at all. It sounds like something that needs to be squashed after all. But this platform, very formidable, very manoeuvrable, very steady, and with great survivability of course. Low heat signature and a relatively small radar cross section, it's not the easiest plane to shoot down with missiles. Added to that, its airframe design and the plane can survive a great deal of damage. A shocking amount you might say. So I'm quite convinced the CI-22 Cricket is undervalued, underused, and all too often in general looked down upon as the crappy beginner plane in nuclear option. And so I decided to take one out in a game of Escalation to see what sort of capers I could get up to. Having taken off from the K92 highway strip, my primary objective, as far as I could see, was to engage and destroy enemy ground forces moving north from the Dust Bowl highway airstrip. There were very few enemy aircraft in the air that I could see, but a fellow Cricket, unfortunately employed by the enemy, did engage me with his missiles, and I locked him up and waited. Previously, I would have undoubtedly fired my missile as soon as I got the shoot prompt, but I wanted to wait and see. He was trying to engage my own ground forces, and I could see them engaging him with the integrated air defense vehicles. And indeed, as I closed the distance, it wasn't long before he was destroyed. Happy I didn't waste my missiles now. Anyway, pushing on, it was time to return to my primary objective, engaging and destroying enemy ground forces advancing north towards the K92 highway. And indeed, as I approached, enemy air defences began to fire at me. I quickly locked up a line-breaker SAM and fired off a Kingpin missile before breaking right to move away, deploying flares as I went. His missiles missed, mine did not. With their close integrated air defence now destroyed, the enemy mechanised company moving north up the highway was now wide open to air attack, and I was of course very happy to oblige and engage just as they came in range of our own ground forces moving south. With the recon vanguard now gone, it was time to quickly finish off whatever remained of the convoy, already much depleted by my allies, before pushing on to any follow-on forces. But I also noticed now that a number of enemy chicanes were hanging around in the area, and these things can cause a shocking amount of damage to our own ground forces. Already running somewhat low on air-to-ground weaponry, I landed, rearmed, taken off this time with two 20mm automatic cannon pods. I was going chicane hunting, and I wish I'd gotten in the air only minutes earlier, as I saw one fire a barrage of missiles at our own ground forces, causing terrible damage. Lambs to the slaughter simply isn't in it. This bastard had to die, and as he manoeuvred to turn away from his attack run, I closed in from his starboard side, opening fire with my 20mm cannons. The helicopter's gunner was still targeting the ground forces, with their own cannon rather than shooting at me, and my long steady burst simply disintegrated the enemy aircraft. This of course drew the attention of his squadron colleagues, and air-to-air missiles of the heat-seeking variety soon began to home in on me. I hoped to destroy another chicane, however, this one was not messing around. He was watching me closely, his gun swivelling as I flew past. An attempt to close to gun range would simply not do, and my plan was to retreat to the mountains, take cover there from the enemy missiles, and return in a sneak attack as the chicanes got busy engaging our ground forces. But in the end, this was not actually necessary. Though I didn't see it happen, both the enemy chicanes I had flown past were engaged and destroyed by our own ground forces. With the immediate air threat now gone, I landed, refueled and rearmed my aircraft. Once again, going up with more of a air-to-ground loadout. Returning to my original role of close air support for our ground forces, pushing south towards the Dust Bowl airstrip. I had aboard a pair of AGM-68 air-to-ground missiles, and I decided that I would use these to engage enemy facilities just north of the Dust Bowl highway airstrip. And switching to my kingpins, I began firing off my rockets at targets of opportunity, ground forces and the like, knocking them out one after the other. Until at last I settled upon a target that was of high priority for me, a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. Not much cop against a fast jet, but against a cricket it could be something of a problem. Popping up over the hill, I fired off my kingpin, before turning to engage some enemy tanks moving along the highway towards our own ground forces. It was apparent that the enemy were launching something of a local counterattack, in an attempt to keep our forces at bay from capturing the Dust Bowl airstrip. The anti-aircraft gun had survived my attack, either due to me breaking the lock, or due to him shooting down my rocket. I re-engaged whilst he was distracted having a crack at one of my allies, whom he unfortunately brought down. But he received a kingpin to the face for his troubles immediately after. And so with all the enemy vehicles bar one IFV now destroyed around the ad hoc airbase, I moved in to engage some of the mobile ground facilities with my guns, knocking out a fuel bowser and an ammunition truck, which both exploded quite spectacularly. The single IFV, however, continued to engage me. He had already caused a small amount of damage to my airframe, and I was obliged to take rather dangerous evasive action before heading back to base to rearm, refuel and get some repairs made quickly on my aircraft. So far, the battle was going very well. We had pushed the enemy ground forces back quite some way. The Dust Bowl highway airstrip was wide open to capture now, and almost all enemy air activity had been off in the west, away from my sector. There was a rather violent battle raging around the South Buscali General Aviation Airbase, but as I said, that was outside of my sector. With the Dust Bowl highway strip now secure, I was now free to start pressing on, attacking more targets deeper into enemy territory. And as I was preparing to drop my two 250-pound bombs on an enemy facility, I noticed a small convoy of vehicles moving to outflank our own, pushing on towards the Dust Bowl airstrip. Naturally, I quickly turned to engage, fired off a series of Kingpin missiles towards the integrated air defense, destroying it completely, before turning back to engage his rather unfortunate, almost completely unprotected consort, a single IFV. He appeared to be escorting a fuel truck, which of course was a target of open opportunity for me. Switching to guns, I closed in for the kill on the completely defenceless target. The poor sad grubs didn't know what to do. So far the battle had been quite fun, really. Anyway, with the fuel truck destroyed, I turned back towards my original target, an enemy facility which I was going to destroy with two 250-pound bombs. I was engaged by enemy air defense as I flew towards the target, but I remained on course and steadily dropped my flares to break the lock, before at last getting on target and releasing my bombs straight on top of the building, before hastily turning away to make my escape. Now, having landed at the Dust Bowl airstrip under our control, I rearmed, refueled and took off once again, this time to attack the enemy facilities just to the north of the airstrip, factories producing enemy vehicles. This of course was a primary target for our continued campaign, and the facility itself was made up of a number of buildings that would require a number of sorties. I had to break away from my first attack run as enemy air defense in the area was quite strong, but I'd gotten a lock on the line breaker Sam and moved into a good attack position. I of course had to wait for my targeting data to update. Naturally, the enemy vehicle was not remaining static, and at last I got the targeting information I needed, turned, lasered my target and fired off a trio of Kingpin missiles. Enemy air defense in the area now taken care of, at least those carrying missiles, I could now attack the enemy facilities without too much trouble. Or so he says. Fortunately, as already mentioned, my plane was not the easiest type of plane to lock up. Simply reducing altitude would help break a lock from our radar guided missile. Anyway, one factory building was destroyed. It was time to prepare to head back and engage the others, but not before attacking some targets of opportunity. A munition truck, my favourite target of all, because they always explode quite spectacularly. As I prepared to come in for a landing, I was engaged by something with a powerful cannon. It didn't actually hit me or cause any damage at all, but it was close. I believe it was an IFV or maybe a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, who knows. But either way, it was a sign that enemy ground forces were moving into the area, perhaps even preparing a counterattack towards the Dust Bowl airstrip. On my next sortie, I took off with no fewer than 4 AGM-68 missiles, hoping to use them to lay about the enemy factory. As I headed towards the target, I noticed a single enemy vehicle making a dash for the Dust Bowl airstrip. With nothing but pilots and ground crew at the airstrip, there was nothing really to defend it from this one vehicle, and he could single-handedly capture the whole base. And so, having fired off a pair of AGM-68 missiles at the factory complex, destroying one of the buildings, I came about, turning towards this lone vehicle and endeavoured to destroy it before it could capture the Dust Bowl airstrip. I had also loaded up for this sortie with linchpin rockets and decided to engage a IR SAM on top of the mountain, yet another line breaker SAM. Once again, to ensure the kill, I fired off a salvo of 3 rockets. And I'm very glad that I did, because it looked as though the first was destroyed before it could hit the target. More enemy ground counter-offensives were being launched towards the Dust Bowl airstrip, and I fired several linchpin missiles at the tank, which seemed to take them in its stride quite impressively. The lighter armoured vehicles in consort with the tank did not, however. Coming about for a second run, I decided to let the tank have it with an AGM-68, and it was only when I saw the target that I realised there was a second vehicle still running with the tank. It might seem like overkill to some, but they both received an AGM-68 in the end. This missile is particularly powerful and will cause shocking amounts of damage to a ground vehicle. Things were coming to a head now. The enemy were launching more and more desperate counterattacks against us. And as I prepared to take off for yet another sortie, in the distance, in the direction of Sandrift Air Base, I saw a trio of nuclear explosions. And after regarding the digital map, I realised that these 3 explosions had occurred right over the forces we had advancing in that direction. There was no time to worry or hang around, however. A new enemy column was pressing past the ruins of the old factory buildings, having cleared many of our troops out of the way at this point, and were pressing on towards the Dust Bowl airstrip. I actually observed the enemy tank quite happily pushing one of our own ground vehicles clean out of the way before destroying it. Whilst carrying out this attack run and preparing for my next, I then came under attack from a pair of enemy missiles, one radar guided and one infrared guided. And indeed, I was extremely lucky to survive. Not only just about dodging the missiles, but I had missed hitting the ground by a gnat's dick's width. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. More enemy missiles were coming my way. Indeed, the enemy had advanced so close now to the Dust Bowl airstrip that they could reach me as I flew over the base. I was required to extend quite far out, come about, and prepare a new attack, prioritising the enemy's surface-to-air missile launcher, of course. But a new, more pressing threat lit up on my screen, an FS-20 Vortex. I had no air-to-air ordnance save for my cannon, of course, and enemy surface-to-air missile weaponry was still causing me some problems, causing me to have to take evasive action, deploying my flares, which were now very nearly depleted. The Vortex now fired a radar-guided missile at me from very close range, and I was able to dodge it, fortunately, and as I turned to face my enemy, I realised that he had been hit. The aircraft was on fire, and he was in a bad way, but I took note of the single piece of ordnance that fell from his plane. It didn't move or look like a missile. I couldn't tell what it was, but I soon found out. His dying act was to release a single 1.5 kiloton nuclear warhead, landing plumb over the Dust Bowl airstrip base. And with such a terrible setback, our forces were ordered to withdraw back to their starting positions. It seems that the recent liberal use of nuclear weapons had led our leadership to approach the enemy for a ceasefire, a truce.